right. Are you like no notes at all?
Oh, no, I have.
I'm like,
I have-
dang.
No. I didn't know that. I should have asked ahead of time. I didn't know the setup, so I just went for the like.
Oh, let me see out front.
Right, I had notes there. I had a,
One sec.
okay.
Where am I for like timing and cue wise?
We were saying 3:30. I say like 3:35, take questions.
Okay.
Or three, I'm sorry. It's an hour session.
Yeah.
We're saying it's a 45-minute and then 15-minute Q&A. You want to go 50, eyeball it, and give 10 minutes for Q&A?
Okay.
Because you're done. You're the last of the day.
Okay.
So you can go as long as you want.
Okay.
Within reason.
Is there anyone that like in the audience that I'm looking that's like, hey, wrap it up, or
I'll come over and bring a blue thing if we're
Okay.
like, you gotta, it's
I
a
don't
5-minute
think we're
warning.
gonna go on, but I just want to make sure
Okay,
I'm not
okay,
ignoring someone that's like
perfect.
speak louder or
Yeah.
wrap it up or.
No, I'll just bring up the blue thing if it looks like we're dragging on along. Please take your seats. And our panelists. Where'd they go? We lost them, Ingrid?
Think water.
Oh, okay. Kyle's got his bow tie,
I love it.
right? Got your water?
Just had some. Thank you.
Do I need to turn this? Does yours have a light? Okay. It's working. You know, do I need to press this or?
Is it on? There you go.
Last group.
So am I. Welcome to panel session 4, our final session of the day. I'm pleased to introduce our panel. To my immediate left is our moderator, Emily Olson, managing editor of Global Women's Soccer for The Athletic of the New York Times. To Emily's left is Kyle Adams, former deputy director of athletics at Delaware State University, and now the principal and chief strategist for It's Bigger Than the Ball. To Kyle's left is Dr. Ingrid Wicker-McCree, former director of athletics, North Carolina Central University. And to Ingrid's left is Thomas Newkirk, a civil rights attorney and practicing in Iowa for almost 35 years. There you go.
Thank you. Yes, this panel is on the price of progress, where we're going to talk about how changing economics will impact diversity in coaching and administration. And I'm a journalist at heart, and one of the #1 rules is don't write your story before the game happens. And for the exact reason of that last panel, which brought up a really great point towards the end about the role of coaching and how it's beyond tactics and it's about psychology and what needs to be improved. And I think part of that and what we're going to address in this panel kind of ties into how important diversity, having coaches of color, women involved plays into all of that. So before we get started, I'm going to read a couple of stats to get us set up. Looking at the Tides report from 2022, which is the Institute of Ethics in Sports, it assessed that the racial and gender hiring received a C. Now, you might be thinking C's passing, like, great. But it is also the worst report across all major sports and college sports that the Tides organization did. So grading on a curve, not great. Looking at that and thinking about what that means as a whole, Dr. McCree, I'd like to start with you and ask about, one, what is the landscape now since 2022? How has that changed? And to the last panel, what role does diversity play in some of the issues that were brought up?
So good afternoon. I'm delighted to be here. This is my first symposium and won't be my last. So thank you so very much. I think that it's very important that I share my experiences. You know, the old adage of if you can see them, you can be them. And it's something that was very true in my career. I was very fortunate to have women coaches throughout my entire sports career. I started playing basketball at the age of 10, switched to volleyball. Remember seeing Flo Hyman and Rita Crockett dominate the sport in a predominantly white sport at the time. And so when I saw them, I said, hey, I can do that. And I ended up on a volleyball scholarship here at George Washington University. I'm a colonial, not a revolutionary, but it's okay. But I played for 2 women coaches at George Washington University. And then after graduating from GW, had the opportunity to go be a grad assistant coach at North Carolina State, where a woman reached out to me, the head coach, and asked me to come and be her grad assistant. And so for volleyball, and then going to North Carolina Central University when another woman who was serving as the interim AD asked me to come and be the head coach there. And so again, transitioning to my administration career and watching and seeing trailblazers like Jeanette Lee, Nikki Frank, Roberta Abney, Tina Sloan Green. And again, I said, well, if they can do it, I can too. And for 28 years, I served in various roles as coaching and administration at North Carolina Central University. So, you know, that again, I saw them and then I could be them. And so representation really matters. We talk about diversity and the numbers and gender and people of color. The NCAA's report in 2024, the database out of 20,222 head coaches, and that's in Division I, II, and III, 86,000 Black student athletes, but yet 61% of the head coaches were white male. 21% of the head coaches were white females. 8% were Black males, and less than 4% or 3% were Black females. So for the 233,000 women athletes and the 86,000 Black athletes, the majority of what they saw in terms of the head coaches and positions were of white males. Of the 1,093 directors of athletics across Division I, II, and III in 2024, 62% were white males, 20% were white females, 10% Black males, and 4% Black females. When I retired in 22, I was one of 11 Black females in all of Division I. And so again, and hopefully, and I inspired our student athletes every year because they got to see someone that looked like them in a leadership role. And then another administrative unit, I promise is my last bit of statistics, that doesn't get a lot of attention is in sports performance, which is a space that I'm working in now. So out of 1,173 head athletic trainers, 54% are white males, 34% are white females, 3% are Black females, and 2% are Black males. And last, the American Association of Colleges reported that less than 5% of all doctors in the United States are Black. And so those that are serving as team physicians and amongst the NCAA, which is a requirement, 73% are white males, 15% are white females, 3% are Black males, and 0%, it's only 5, are Black females. And so, and one of those Black males I work for at Duke, and he is the head team physician for North Carolina Central, St. Augustine's College, Shaw University, the MEAC, and Duke football. And so again, if you can see them, you can be them. And so while there are more opportunities for women in sports, but it's still a long way to go. And I think we have to continue to encourage young people like those that are here to pursue those careers in athletics administration and coaching. And we also have to hold accountable those decision makers to have the courage to hire people of color and women. The Advancement of Blacks in Sports is an organization I work with, and we put out a watch list every single year of Black coaches in volleyball, men's and women's basketball, football, track and field, and this year we're adding softball and golf. And I send those lists to ADs, search firms, presidents, commissioners, to make sure that they know there is a pool of women and people of color coaches for these jobs. So we have to do a better job of holding them accountable to make sure that they have the opportunity, when they have the opportunity, that they hire women and people of color.
Yeah, and I think,
Hold on.
yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, go for, and I wanted to take it to you, Mr. Adams, because you've spent time as a deputy director in athletics, but also as a coach. And wanted to ask a little bit more what you've seen and your experience, both as a coach.
Oh,
and
wow. First,
Are there any college coaches in the room? This is part of the problem. You know, there was a lot of really meaningful information that's been shared here today. And I'm very familiar with the work that you all have been doing for years. But coaches are not at the table and are not involved in these conversations. And if you're not, you know, either you're at the table or you're on the menu. And a lot of what's happening today in this current ecosystem, it impacts coaches' careers directly. You know, we had coaches, men's and women's basketball in Tampa Bay and in San Antonio over the weekend. You know what the primary conversation was? It wasn't this. It was how to get their next job. And, you know, as we continue to move forward, we've got to find ways for our coaches to become, especially in this landscape, how they can become more educated on what's happening in college athletics, because they're not. And especially as things continue to shift, they become more and more focused on how to win and how to win to get to their next job. And our student athletes are suffering for it. So I felt compelled to share that.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I've worked in environments where I've been able to do, and in my deputy role, a lot of my role was coaching development. And we would have these conversations. I like to think that I was a coach that always had an inclination towards what was going on in the landscape, student athlete development, mental wellness. And I would have these conversations with our coaches, and they would look at me like I had 5 heads. And now we're seeing all these things that are coming to pass, and you're seeing young people that they're not able to retain their student athletes. You know, so many things are happening right now, and they're scrambling, but they've got to get to the table. And we've got to have coaches that are engaged in these conversations where they're becoming knowledgeable of the shifts that are happening in college athletics right now.
And you talk about getting to the table. I think that's a good point to bring into Mr. Thomas Newkirk about you've spent 35 years and you've specialized in the biases and that present risk to employment and especially in college athletics. What are some of from the people that come to you that have either been terminated or haven't, you know, some of the issues that they're bringing to you, what are some of the barriers that you're seeing for women and people of color?
Every person in college athletics holds stereotypes about women. Every single person, every single female, every single male, every single African-American, every single Caucasian. All of us hold stereotypes about women in college athletics that interfere with our ability to evaluate those women equally and fairly compared to men for doing the same damn job. That's the barrier that's holding women back and creating, if I could take a step back, because the title is about the financial impact. And if you go back to 1972, when Title IX was passed, 90% of the coaches of women's teams were women. And then in came the money and outflowed the women. And since over the last 30 years at least, women have been capped at coaching women at 44% of women's teams. It's literally just stuck right there. Not 47, not 50 in the back down, it's 44 capped. Men coach 56% of women and they coach 96% of men. Women are still excluded and segregated from coaching men in 2025. That barrier exists in part because of stereotypes and bias and the effects it has on all of our evaluative abilities. But now with the NIL, what do you think is going to happen? We've never addressed that problem. We've never once dealt with it. And now NIL is bringing more money in, and that money is going to follow race and it's going to follow gender. And that means that the athletes who are going to get more of the NIL and more of the money are going to be primarily the men, sometimes women, but primarily the men. And that's the way it's going to flow. So that's going to be the problem. It's going to cover up and gloss over that dirty secret that affects primarily women around the United States and secondarily coaches of color.
You talk about the bias and the impact that it has on hiring. Where is that coming from? Are you saying the bias that's coming from the people of hiring? I mean, I have statistics here that the overwhelming majority of presidents and chancellors and conference executives are white men. Are those the issues? Are the biases coming from players, from fellow coaches? What is it everywhere?
It's everywhere. That's the thing that we have to deal with. It's not just a bunch of people that look like me, though we can be the problem. It's the fact that in college athletics, it's a male-dominated organization. It's about leadership and power and control. And the reason why we've never had a female president is the same reason we don't value women in coaching in the same way as men. When they step into that leadership role, we devalue them, we doubt them, we question them, we blame them. It's this constant subconscious process that that affects our evaluative ability of women generally. And that yes, they get hired, but they this revolving door of they get complaints and they get terminated and they get pushed out and they get stressed out. And that's what happens to create that revolving door. It also works in similar ways for the administrative roles as well, though oddly, we're making some progress in getting women into higher level administrative roles. Women coaches are just blocked because of the leadership bias problem.
Well, also too, and we talked about this on our prep call, and I promise if anyone wants to do some research, I'm with you on this topic. When I would change or have to transition coaches for our women's programs, I always meet with the student athletes to say, what are you looking for in your next coach? And 9 times out of 10 for a women's team, the young women would say they wanted a male coach. And then I would say, well, how many of you want to coach one day? Just to put that in their minds. And so when you talk about it's bias, it's everyone. It's not just white men. It's all of us. It's how we socialize as women in this country. And so that's a hard thing to fight against too, because then if you don't have a male coach and now they have some predispositions of what's it going to be like because she hired a woman coach. So we fight this battle ourselves, especially as women.
And Mr. Adams, could you speak a little bit to maybe some of the experiences you've had, whether it was being hired or looking after who's getting hired when it comes to these biases?
Well, coaching 20 years, I've seen a lot. I've gone on coaching interviews and while I'm in the interview, a person walks in, introduces themselves, gets a cup of water, and they walk out. And 2 weeks later, that's the person that they hired for the job. Seeing those type of things where you could be considered a token interview. But thinking about how that moves in today, and with this influx of money and donorship, how that's going to minimize even those opportunities, I think, for people. And I think as you look at coaches and administrators getting hired, I think you're going to see, people, you're going to have donors that are going to be making decisions on who gets hired and who gets fired. And I think that it's a sad, I think the other part, as we look at the celebrity coach, trend that's going on right now, what does it say about people who've worked a great deal of time to kind of come up the ranks? And I could tell you guys some horror stories about my coaching career, sleeping in the locker room, one of my first jobs. I just wanted to coach.
Not at North Carolina Central.
No, man. No, man. I wanted to coach. I wasn't a great player. My father wasn't a coach. I didn't have this great pedigree. I just knew I wanted to coach, and I was going to outwork everybody in sight. And for coaches who've kind of come and been told this is the way to go about it, now a donor can come in and say, no, we're going to hire this person. Mm-hmm. What does that say about the people that we're preparing? What does it say to our student athletes and our students who are trying to do it the right way and come up through the trenches and become an intern, become a GA, become a restricted earners third coach, and just someone who may have had some success as a player gets an opportunity? I think that's, we've got to really look at what's going on today.
You said something interesting there that I think it's maybe an obvious question, but as we're encouraging young student athletes to also consider the coaching path, how harmful is that token interview in the process, and how much does it play into the overall?
It's devastating. It's devastating. Now, and I think because young people are putting themselves out there in a time where that's a very courageous thing to do. And it's always been, but more so now, just based around, I think it's important to recognize that our young people are still dealing with the impact of COVID. And I think coaches, administrators need to also take that into consideration. That's still impacting our students. But for them to put themselves out there in that way and prepare and do all those things right, and to not see the fruit of their success. And here's the thing, you can interview for a job and not get it, and build a great relationship with that coach and say, hey, I needed to do something different, but if I can help you as we move forward, and you can develop a mentorship relationship, but that's not happening today. So I think it's extremely devastating for young people who put themselves out there, who really want to pursue a career in this ministry, because I still believe coaching is a ministry. For them not to gain some tangible experience from that, I think it's harmful.
And then I wanted to look at the once coaches are hired and the compensation part of it and how much that plays into it. You mentioned the celebrity coach, but and some of these salaries, I wrote them down, are public, and you see who's making millions, where they're making millions, what they look like. It goes back to if you can see them, so it's about the passion, but it's also about the money. If you see someone that's making a lot of money and that they do or don't look like you, it impacts it. Dr. McCree, how much have you seen race and gender factor into the compensation of coaches, and how does that affect the overall ecosystem?
Well, especially in non-Power 4, Power 5 situations or environments, it's really challenging. I think when I was named AD in 2008, it was no negotiating. Like, here's 150,000, you gonna take it or not? And at that point, I was like, oh, it tripled my salary. So, but then as the years go on, and I think you have to look at the environment, you have to look at the conference. I do think there's more parity now, especially at our HBCUs on the administrative level, but it's still none when it comes to women and men in terms of coaching. But a lot of that, again, is driven by budget. A lot of it's driven by influence. You were just talking about the celebrity coach. If I was still sitting in the seat, it would be extremely difficult for me, because I truly believe in the rites of passage in terms of doing it the right way, being an assistant or a grad assistant, associate head, and so on. And so, but I know the influences right now are because of the money. I do peer reviews of schools that are transitioning to Division I. And the last meeting we have is usually with the entire steering committee and the president. And my last statement is, please keep intact the student athlete experience, because the more you go from D2 to D1, it is just a business. And so I get it why they're trying to do and hire the Deions of the world, but at the same time, there's so many other aspects of being a coach that you want to hire, but then those influences are saying, no, you got to hire Michael Vick and pay him $400,000, but yet your tennis coach is still making $50,000, men and women. So, it's you can't escape it, and I'm not sure how I would handle it as an athletic director at this point right now.
And there's just more, like we mentioned at the top, there's just more and more money coming in, and it's going to cause more of that divide. To bring it back to you, Mr. Newkirk, I also wanted to look at, okay, so we've talked about the process of getting hired, what happens when you're hired, but what are we also seeing in the differences of evaluations? And I know this is your area of expertise, of the coaches that are maybe not getting as long of a time to make mistakes. What do we see when it comes to diversity and the firing of coaches?
Well, my primary, I've been a lawyer for 35 years, but my primary practice today, I only represent female coaches who are accused of bullying and abuse for simply coaching like men. So when they yell at the athlete, they're an abusive bully. When the male yells, he's fine. That's what happens. And I've identified over 300 of them who coach just like men, get their careers destroyed. Hall of Fame coaches like Sylvia Hatchell, Rita Crockett, who would mind if I mentioned her. Great, fantastic coaches who get this thing. And so what happens is is that female coaches have a completely different experience from the male coaches because they have a different level of expectation on them from primarily their female athletes to attend to the needs of the athletes, emotional needs, mental health needs, et cetera. And what happens is because the female coach can never fill that gap, they're always blamed for some failure in some way, even though working twice as hard as anybody to meet those needs. That's the gender stereotype. It creates an extra burden on the female coach. It burns them out, but then they get complaints and get pushed out the door. I know that they're paid differentially. It's a little different today, but you know, the real difference in pay for women is that they have to do at least 25% more work than their male counterparts because they're exclusively required to coach women. That's part of what's going on. So there's a whole host of barriers that we can talk about this for hours, but the bottom line is we need awareness of this problem. And by the way, I know we're here at Howard University. I focus on gender because I see it as a way to break through, to finally break through the barrier of a stereotype that is powerful and that will bleed into and help issues of race as well. You can't treat one group well and not another group when you're dealing with stereotypes. So it actually breaks through on race as well across the board.
This kind of diverts a little bit from the kind of overall price topic, but I think it's important there. We've heard on panels today of student athletes kind of saying that they are not getting through to their coach. And then obviously now we're talking about coaches feeling like they're let go for reasons that aren't right. I think this is for you, Mr. Adams and Dr. McCray, of then how do those things come to the middle and create a functioning system of both the coach and the player being heard and breaking down some of the disconnect there?
So one of my last meetings before I retired with the coaches, all the head coaches, and I said, either you need to do your research on emotional intelligence, learn how to communicate effectively with the student athletes and their parents. And they knew I was very honest because I am a parent of a college student athlete now, and I'm one of them. It's okay, but I am. But I said that to them to say, you're not going to have a job if you don't. And so I believe every athletic program should have an assistant or associate athletic director for coach and staff development, right? On the university side, you have the faculty, what is it called? The faculty support, there's an office, faculty development, right? And they're there to help develop the junior faculty
Coaches need to
seeking tenure. Why wouldn't you have the same? And especially if you're an athletic director that's not in tune with development and professional development. And so that's where it has to be some kind of balance, and that athletic director needs to be aware of that. And how are they going to help the coach and the student athlete so that there's empathy there amongst those two groups? And it's because there's not a lot done. You know, we send our coaches to their conventions and all of that, but they're talking about X's and O's. You know, you start seeing more now on how to communicate in those type of sessions, but one session is not going to help a person for the rest of the year. What are you doing as a leader of that program to help make sure you keep the C's from becoming the little C's, the little concerns don't become the big C's? But you have to be attentive to that. You have to want to make sure you're doing that, because otherwise you're going to be in the newspaper, right? Because a student athlete, or they're going out on social media and talking about the coach. You know, how are you engaging the parents from day one, right? So student athlete gets angry with the coach because the coach yelled at them. They go home or they call their mom and dad and say, hey, coach yelled at me today. Tomorrow, the student athlete goes back and the coach, they dap it up. They're good. But now the parent has no clue that they're okay. So there's so many little things, nuances that can be prevented if you're proactive about it and be true to, yes, there are going to be conflicts, right? But how do you handle it? And as Jen said, conflict is not always bad. It's going to be there, but you have to be proactive in how you want to address it and handle it.
And that feels like a departure from the topic, but it's really not, because it goes into the hiring and the firing and the financial side of it. Mr. Adams, just curious, when we talk about that, what's the difference in leeway that we see of the chances that coaches get comparatively coaches of color and women compared to white male coaches.
Y'all watch the men's tournament. You know, a couple years ago, we were talking about, you know, all these coaches who got fired, assistant coaches got fired for all these different things. All of those head coaches at those institutions have been elevated. And we talk about things with institutional control, I think was the term that was used. You know, and we're not talking about, you know, the coach that just won a national championship was involved in a Title IX investigation. But that's all glanced over now because they won. I think back to the point that Dr. McCree was making, when you talk about the different characteristics that coaches need to be equipped with, I think that's a soul thing. It's a spirit thing to want to be able to become inclined emotionally to be able to care for your student athletes. And I think it says something about the people that we're hiring. I've always viewed coaching as a coach is an educator, right? A coach needs to have a pedagogy. How is it that you go about the development of your student athletes, regardless? You got 12 student athletes, regardless if you win 25 games or one. What are the tangible takeaways that each of your student athletes is equipped with when they get done with you? And that's going out the window today. And we hear more and more stories about why student athletes who are having terrible experiences. It's very saddening when you think about it. And it, you know, for people who genuinely care about people, coaching is not, educators are getting out of this profession at a high rate. And I'm saddened to see that. I don't know if I answered your question.
No, you did, and I think it all fits together. I don't know, Dr. McCree, did you want to add
I
to
just
that?
wanted to piggyback off of that when earlier we talked about, right, the young women want to play for male coaches. And so then you take it a step further. I think this year, Jen, correct me, it was about 11 Black women volleyball head coaches that were terminated this year, and mostly at predominantly white institutions. And so it's hard for me to believe that, okay, they were all that bad.
Right.
All right, so the barrier even for that group is even more so. So if the young women don't want to play for women in general, and then there is something there about playing for a Black woman, and if they're not at a HBCU, and so it's so many layers. And then just, you know, I was told not to get into that, but the climate today. But anyway, I just don't know. It's sad.
Yeah.
You know, I pray that it does change. I pray for my daughter who hopefully she wants to be a coach. But unless you really have to work on those connections, I think the young lady asked about how do you get in? You have to build your connections. Being here today, you have to use those connections. There are people that want to help you succeed, but you have to make sure you're, like Kyle said, putting yourself out there and being present in the spaces where you need to be.
And I think I mean, we've talked about a lot of the downsides, but I'd like to leave with something a little bit optimistic. And I go back to the first thing that we said, and I'll just start with Mr. Newkirk and come down this way. But we talked about the more money that comes in, the bigger the divide is. But I would ask each of you to tell us what your pitch would be as to why more women, people of color, more diversity in this space is actually good business, because that's the conversation that's going to break through to the people that have the checkbooks. So just curious, and starting with you, why is it good business?
Well, I will give you from my perspective. It's good business, so I stopped suing you. Universities, you keep screwing up, you keep screwing over the women, female coaches. I'm going to keep coming after you till the last day I got. So if you'd like to save some money, just, you know, take some time, educate yourselves on how stereotyping and bias works. I think we need to have forced diversity in coaching teams for both men and women. Because you need gender diversity on a team for men as much as or more so even than on women's teams, because they don't have any access to gender diversity in their team and the coaching methods. So something like that would be helpful, but that's all I can say in terms of like a quick remedy, but I don't have any other business reason to do it. That's all I got.
Because those coaches, yeah, they have mamas and grandmas, so there probably needs to be a female perspective when helping them with their young men. And I think generational differences matter as well in terms of Gen Z and Gen Alpha, and what their needs are. And I think that could help dictate why there's a need for diversity. But I also think that if in the 2028 Olympics, right, the IOC just said that I think most of the slots, more than 50% of the participation slots will be women athletes for the first time ever in the Olympics. So if they can do that with all of the global issues everywhere with women and participation in the sports, we're not the only ones that have issues. Then we need to follow suit. We can do that, and so I just think for me, it's the 233,000 women and the 86,000 Black student athletes that should be the driver. It should look like our teams look, and especially in the revenue sports. So.
I think because it's humane. I think about, and Jen talked about it a little bit, there's a narrative now that's really trying to, I feel, separate men and women. And I've seen it, as a man who coached women's basketball, I saw it a lot. But I think about a story that a lot of people don't know about. We're all, we've become familiar with Coach Stringer's team at Cheney that played in the '82 national championship game, right? The only HBCU to play at that level. But I think what's not amplified enough was John Cheney, who had his success at Temple, was the head men's coach at Cheney at that time. And they practiced against each other every day. Coach Stringer would coach the men. Coach Cheney would coach the women. And, we hear so many instances about, how women are here and men are here. But anything that can bring us together where we can, what you're doing and how you're teaching is just as valuable as anyone else. And I think that we've got to do more to help bridge that gap and connect the genders. But I'll say this also. And I point this to you all. There's a reason why you all were born at this time. In this time in the history of this country, it's a reason why you're here. Because you're here to help shift the change. Don't diminish your value, your thought, or your influence. You guys are equipped with what it is you need to make the changes that you want to see. So be encouraged.
That's a phenomenal way to end. I believe we still have some time for questions. Yes, do we have the microphone or? It's coming.
Greetings and salutations. I'm Dr. Keith Adams, and I'm the president of the CK Safe Project. You've heard from many of the student athletes that I work with throughout the day. I want to address Mr. Adams. It's real what you said. To be overly qualified and still not have opportunities does hurt. CKA, we didn't want to fight anymore. So I created, along with my former student athletes, co-workers, friends, what have you, an organization designed to assist in the process. We're actually creating a gap year academy for 2027 for men and women's basketball players because we see the need to pause before you make all these big decisions. Let smart people help you. So one of the things we say is when your future is on the line, experience matters, and we want to give you experience. Another thing is coaches don't get the type of experience that I had just a generation ago. Most college folks don't have educational backgrounds or just got a degree in whatever so they can work a college job. So yes, it is a calling. So we will have general managers, we will have coaches, we will have assistants, we will have interns to teach you how to do business. There's no right or wrong way. There's a preferred way, but this preferred way would get you a 90% college graduation rate. So I appreciate the panel having that real conversation. And yes, the work is hard, but it's needed. And we are attempting to assist by doing independent research on student athlete motivation, their thoughts on collective bargaining, and asking coaches what it's like to coach now, because it's not like before. So again, I just want to thank the panel. Appreciate it.
And before we move on, if there's other questions, just wanted to give you guys a chance to either respond to that or talk about the organizations if anyone.
Well, I think it's so important that all of us in here have the opportunity to help someone. Sean, I had the privilege of sitting with him who won the award today and connected him. I think, where did he leave? He must have left. But I connected him with the lead media relations director for Duke basketball today, just like that. And so we have to be intentional. We're always telling the young folks to be intentional about your career. You need to do this, be present. We have to do that too. I am so blessed. I get to take 19 HBCU women volleyball players to Botswana at the end of May. I did not have to do that, but I wanted them to have that experience because our students don't get to go over. Athletes don't get to have those opportunities because they're athletes. So we, the adults in here, have to do a better job of making sure we're always available. It's just a text or it's just a call. It's just them giving them their number to help them. So I would really challenge all of us in here to just continue, not that you're not doing because you're here, but to continue doing more of that.
Do we have any? Yes, go ahead.
Good afternoon. I'm Jan Blay from Delaware State University, the former FAR. So y'all forgot to mention the statistics for the FARs,
I did.
you know, but I'll let it slide. Actually, what I was wanting to know though, when you're talking about statistics, that's including HBCUs.
Yes.
So the stats are a lot different when you pull out HBCUs of that. That's one thing. The other thing is the coaches from HBCUs get pigeonholed into just HBCUs.
Yeah, how much of an issue is that? I mean, we mentioned Deion Sanders at one point today. He obviously left, but the balance between feeling like you're pigeonholed and also seeing an opportunity, what does that look like?
That is an extreme challenge. Now, we just saw Norfolk State's coach Vickers do that, and now he's at Auburn. But that is very rare, and across all sports, especially football. And so you almost have to take a step back, right, and go somewhere to be an associate head coach just to get back in to position yourself to become a head coach at a predominantly white institution. And so but I will say that is an area that has gotten better slightly for Black women in administration, because 28 out of those 40 Division I athletic directors are at non-HBCU schools. And then we have 3 that are at FBS schools, right? Vanderbilt, Virginia, and Candace, Carla, and Duke. All right, that worked. So, so there have been some gains in there, but for coaching, trying to transition over, I stayed my entire 28 years at North Carolina Central, 2 at North Carolina A&T in HBCUs, because I felt I needed to be there, and I wouldn't have traded it for anything. But it is very challenging for coaches to make that transition
I would also say, and Dr. McCree mentioned Larry Vickers taking the position at Auburn, the immense pressure that he may feel taking a job in the SEC, and if he's not successful, right, what that could mean for people in the pipeline who are looking to have opportunities to coach at that level, who are at HBCUs, right? The unbelievable pressure that he has on him, I think needs to be taken into consideration.
And it's also across Division I and Division II.
Yep.
I've seen them where a lot of, there's some qualified Division II coaches, winners, and they can't get a Division I job.
Right.
So,
Yeah, there's still that burden of being representing more than just you when you take those opportunities. I think we have a couple more minutes if there's any other questions. Right here.
Hi there, my name is Olivia Gilliand. I am a student at Ohio University, but I'm also a former college athlete. I'm working on starting a Division I wrestling program at our university with some of my colleagues, like Dr. Redpath here. I'm just wanting to hear from you as people who have worked in sports administration. What advice do you have for young coaches, for new coaches, especially in emerging sports like women's wrestling, to kind of combat these issues that you've been speaking about today beforehand?
So during my time at Delaware State, we were very involved with bringing women's wrestling to Delaware State. And one of the things that we felt was extremely important as you look to build out was connecting with the different organizations all over the country who support women's wrestling. People don't know that women's wrestling is one of the fastest growing sports of our emerging sports. I'll connect you with someone that I think that would be a good resource for you. But one of the things that we felt that was important to kind of start the buzz, Delaware has a strong wrestling culture, of course, from the men, but we kind of leaned into that. But we had a wrestling camp, and I'm sure that we did a wrestling clinic. We had some wrestling coaches from two actual Olympians came in and kind of conducted the camp. We had 75 young women from 9 states come to Dover, Delaware, to participate in that clinic. So I commend you for the work that you're doing as a former student athlete, as a student leader, to bring a sport to your campus. That's a legacy that you'll leave on that campus. Salute.
Congratulations.
Yep.
Any other question in the back?
Tom, this one's for you, Tom. Who's responsible when, are you looking at the athletic director? Are you looking at political considerations in terms of those hires? When you look at 300 cases or so, who's the one that's the culprit? Is it the ultimate decision maker, or?
It's really a cumulative thing. Okay, and I can't explain it in 5 minutes, but it's the athletes that misinterpret the coach's behavior and then report it to the administration. The administration then hears that complaint and overreacts to it. It's a constant flow of stereotyping and bias throughout the whole system.
Mhm.
It doesn't matter whether the athletic director is female. Females fire our female coaches all the time. And female coaches actually don't get fired for performance on the field. They get fired for these student athlete issues, what they get fired for most of the time. Parents the helicopter parent used to be a big part of it, but there's not as much anymore. The kids have become so much more independently able to voice their concerns about a coach, which ends up flowing toward the female coach more than the male coach. And administration hears it like that and then places blame on the coach. It just happens. I'm getting a lot less parent direct interference cases than we used to maybe 10 years ago.
Wow.
I'm sure there's somewhat behind it, but that's just as a side note, I was going to say that one thing I think in terms of solution, I think it's 2 things. It's time to start treating 18 to 22-year-old athletes like they're adults I mean, real adults. They can have sex, they can go to war, they can do all the things that we can do. But it's also time for the athletes to also take on that adult responsibility in terms of like understanding the coach's perspective and kind of having a training where you're actually going and training the athlete to understand that there are many reasons why the coach may not be able to respond to their needs at that time. Very, very good coaches. So it's a systemic problem. And I've done a lot of work trying to cut through and figure out how do you explain it to people in a simple way, but it's very difficult.
But
Never. The women are never hired again. Yeah, they're never hired again. They're red scarlet letter on the if they're fired, if they're non-renewed, if they quit, if there's any kind of a whisper of a hint that there was student athlete dissatisfaction about them, they're done.
And right, we want them to be adults. I think that is going to take some time. I know I remember listening to Dawn Staley at a We Coach Academy 2 years ago, and she talked about how from August through November, once a month, she has a parent meeting. And her goal is in terms of communication to make sure that they know exactly what they're communicating to their daughters about how they're going to decide who gets playing time in a very objective measures, because she wants to limit the amount of calls and frustration because my daughter's not playing. And I thought, and she said this in front of 92 women coaches, and I was so glad that she did that, because 30 years ago, well, not 30, 20 something, when I was coaching, I built relationships with the family, because it takes the family. And to take an 18-year-old and think, okay, tomorrow they got it. And especially today, my daughter's schedule was very regimented by me. And so now when she goes off to college, and luckily I knew her coach, you know, she was okay with me still being in that space, but a lot of coaches are not. So how do I get Sydney to be on her own at 18 right away? She's 21, she's almost there now. So luckily she is almost there, honest. When she turned 21, it was like, oh, but I just really firmly believe it's still a village, it's still a family. And the coaches have to really communicate. They don't have to talk to them every day, but they do have to communicate from day one. Hey, this is how I'm going to manage your daughter, with the daughter understanding here's X, Y, and Z. So it just takes a lot.
Does Gino have to do that?
Gino, I don't know, Jen, do you think Gino does that? No, because she's a daddy's girl. But
No, I mean Gino, you know, the UConn coach. Is he?
no, Gino, I'm
No, do you think Gino has to meet with the parents?
That's a good point. It goes into the emotional labor, and it works.
But okay, but one of the things I have always said, I'm okay with, I lead differently as a woman. I'm okay with that. And I'm not saying that he does it. I don't know, but I do know he does it. Probably he does it. But and maybe, you know, but yes, and he has 12 championships and she has 3. But I still think that, and maybe that's why with football coaches and basketball coaches, men coaches, they have female presence on their staffs now.
Well, this is a great example, just like 2 seconds. Gino versus Dawn. Look what she has to do. He was a championship coach. The extra work she has to do to manage her team.
Great
and tell all the other women to do the same thing just to keep your damn job. Gino coaches exactly like he wants to coach. I'm sure he's a great, fantastic coach, but he does what he believes should be done. And the structure of what a coach is surrounds Dawn Staley because it's a male over what she has to do. She has to fit herself in that square peg. That's what's wrong with the system.
And also when it was LSU, South Carolina, same, even, you know, even with Kim Mulkey, it's the same concept, different aspects of it, but Dawn Staley is an intersection of having to do double of that. I want to take 2 more questions, one over here and then one over here, because I know that we need to wrap up.
Yeah, kind of a little, you hit on a little bit of part of my question, but just, is there hope or a way we can even address that perception of, rather than it being comparing female coaches to male coaches or women coaches to male coaches, to just men and women might coach differently, or we don't need to compare them at all? Is there kind of hope for that? Or if there is, what's the message? Because I feel like we're regularly, at least in my experience as a woman, it's being how am I like or not like a man, instead of just how am I as a woman. Anyway, just a little curious on that. And then is there anything in youth sports that we can be doing to help with perception or relationships with coaches? I know there's a lot of conversation about, I don't know, even referees, how they're being treated, but is it thoughts on if, again, kind of going back to a younger level, how can we kind of train them up to be prepared for whatever they get to respect different coaches?
The first part of the question, I just would suggest, I know exactly what you're talking about. There's a concept called servant leadership, which leans itself more toward the concept of how a female might lead differently than a male. It's scientifically shown, but in the real world, subconsciously people frame coaching as man. Full stop. That's all. I mean, it's going to take years to break through that, and you've got to treat it like it's a disease. You've got to treat it. You got to treat it now until we eventually shift our brain and speed up our brain's transition to where we don't think that way anymore. It's like Kim Mulkey or Don Staley, they're fantastic coaches, independent of their gender. That's what we got to get to. I'll let others take the second part of your question. Remember the second part of the question?
No, I don't.
Can you go, the, yeah.
Youth
if it's
sports.
about-
I thought it was youth sports was,
Oh.
Better training.
Youth sports is a whole thing of itself. I mean, I think that I know in volleyball, right, for youth sports, for AAU or club, one thing I do really respect and like about USAV and AAU volleyball is that the students have to referee. They become officials. I don't care if you're 8 years old. If you're on a club team, you're officiating during tournaments. And so what is that teaching them about officiating, respecting officials? Because since we have so many issues, I have not seen as many issues in volleyball, youth volleyball with parents getting, and they do though, getting thrown out and things as I've seen in the media with basketball, some of the other sports. But, you know, what would that look like if basketball AAU did that too? To sensitize the students children to respect the officials and what they're doing. And so I think it takes things like that to start doing to help develop empathy in sport and civility.
And then last question.
Jen Fry.
I know you owe you owe us, but anyway.
So kind of, I think the first question, kind of going off of what you just said, Wick, do you really think, because we already see how refs are treated, that if we entered kids into being refs, that there'd be civility or there'd be even worse on them? That's kind of the first, but the second one, Thomas, I wanted to ask you, when we talk about how quick these Black coaches, especially women, get fired, do you think it's because athletic directors are worried about bad press? They don't want to be thought about as not being the player's AD. So they're like, if a player complained, instead of them saying exactly what you said, they're like, I don't want that player going to social media. And not only are they going to talk about the head coach, they're also going to talk about me as an AD. So I'm going to protect myself and throw the coach under the bus, even though it's a good coach. We know there's no problems. I got to protect this program. I got to protect myself. So I'm going to throw them under the bus and fire them. And like, do you think it's like this real, like for me, this lack of entering into conflict and saying, I don't want to have to worry about the president, the board. So I'm just going to fire this coach and be done with the problem, but not really done with the problem?
Well, that's a great question to enter into the world of how bias works at a micro level. And so the answer is yes, that can be one motivation that's floating in the head. That how the bias works is I see the female coach and I see that maybe it's irrational fear of press or the students complaining or the parents upset, or I'm worried about just how it looks. Or I'm not protecting the girls, whatever it is, all those emotions are flowing in their head. But I look at the female and subconsciously say, she's not worthy of me fighting for her. And the male, I look at him and think the same thing's going on in my head. I look at him and it bounces back and say, I think I ought to stick with him a little longer. That's how bias works. Boom, like that. Thousands and thousands and thousands of times around the country, all over the world, especially in the United States, of course. And it's gender, it works just like that. That's how it works.
Yeah, just to piggyback off of that, his response, Tom's response, I had a situation where a coach came in, a female coach, and took 9 scholarships away. But I also had a male coach who did just about the same. I was in the newspaper, national news, because of the female coach.
Yep.
And but we still supported her. But it was very challenging. So does that run through an AD's mind? Oh, yes. And especially now with social media, you can't hide anything, or not that you want to hide it, but you don't even have time to address a situation. So yeah, that goes through their minds. And I would say about the referee and young athletes, it's a culture renovation. Those organizations would have to be committed to doing something like that and starting there to make sure that they're educated. But, you know, organizations, I know St. Louis's Sports Commission has a sports behavior platform. And we're trying to adopt that with the Durham Sports Commission. So that somewhere in the community, someone's talking about sport behavior, but it would take the organization to start with the vision of changing that culture and really committing to it and having a great plan to address how it's the parents. It's not so much of the athletes. They would probably love to be able to referee themselves. It's the parents that would be the challenge.
Well, I want to thank my panelists for taking the time to go over this. I also did not get to mention at the top, but I do want to give a congratulations to Dr. McCree for being named to the National Association of College Directors Hall of Fame, class of 2025.
Thank you.
And again, thank you for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Second that, congratulations to Dr. McCree. What a fantastic panel. Thank you, Emily, Kyle, Ingrid, Thomas. Well, we have concluded our panel sessions. We would be remiss for not thanking the faculty and event management staff from George Washington University who were in charge of managing this event. We really appreciate all of your hard work with and Lisa Delphi Narati. With those thanks, we end our nationally live streamed coverage. And now we will begin our networking and cocktail hour off to the yard side of the room. We have drinks set up and I believe a little more food. Please help yourself. Get a chance to meet and greet for as long as for the next hour. And I hope you learned a lot today, had some meaningful conversations. Thank you. Thank you to everyone for coming, for the panelists for their time and expertise, and to our board.